us begin.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Legends of Tabletop. My name is Leah, and I am here with Paul Tremblay. And would you care to introduce yourself, Paul?
Sure. First, thank you everybody for listening to the Legends of Tabletop, and I am Paul Tremblay, author of The Head Full of, not The Head Full of Ghosts. That's a different book. A Head Full of Ghosts. In my most recent book, Cabin at the End of the World, and Dog Father to Holly, who may interrupt at some point, but hopefully she'll be good.
Okay. Fantastic. So I know that you've been asked this question many, many, many times of how long have you been doing this? Being the writing and keeping and creation of tales.
It's been a long time. I mean, I think I first started messing around with writing stories, and I'd say the first attempt happened in like 1996. And I only know that date because it's right around when I got my first teaching job. And for the first like 4 to 5 years, I really wasn't very serious with it. It was very much a hobby. I was also messing around with guitar playing and trying to write songs. I mean, if I had my druthers, I would have been a punk metal rock star. But I eventually quickly found out, I should say, I was a better writer than I was a musician. So, I guess it was in 2000 or 2001 that I made my first, what we call the professional short story sale. Because at the time, like the professional mark was 3 cents a word. So I started getting more serious in the early 2000s, and it's been a slow but mostly steady climb, with some pratfalls here and there since then.
Well, all right. Now, when doing short stories for the professional market, have you always centered around this genre of thriller, horror?
When I first started, I definitely self-identified as I'm a horror writer. And almost all the short stories I wrote, some might have veered into fantasy or science fiction a little bit, but almost exclusively the short fiction was horror. Although oddly enough, my first attempts at novels, or my first serious attempts at novels, were not horror. They were more sort of like humorous, even comedy, which now in retrospect sort of makes sense, because to me horror and humor are sort of both the reactions you have to life's absurdities. You're either going to react in horror to it, or you try to laugh at it.
That's quite true. Now, what drew you to this? Like, let's see. I'm gonna. Let's see. Let's do it too. What scared you?
So for me,
first thing, what scared you as a human being?
Right. The very first thing was Creature Double Feature, which was a television program. Somewhat, I think it was local to Boston. This was before cable TV. I'm sort of aging myself here, but when I was really young, probably 7, 8, 9, and it was on like channel 56, just outside of Boston, like the UHF. There used to be 2 dials on the television. That was the second dial. And on Saturday afternoons, they would show. The program was called Creature Double Feature. They would show 2 movies. The first one was usually a Godzilla or kaiju movie, and then the second movie was more of a straightforward horror movie. And I loved Godzilla because I loved dinosaurs as a kid, but the second movies would always scare the heck out of me and give me nightmares. Even goofy stuff now, like Attack of the Killer Shrews. I remember that movie. It's an old 1950s black and white. It's not very good, but seeing it when I was like 8 years old, I found it quite scary.
Okay. What was your favorite dinosaur?
I think it. Well, it's funny. I just had an argument with someone online recently because as a child, my favorite dinosaur was Dimetrodon. And I tried saying that recently, and people are like, that's not actually a dinosaur. That was like whatever they called them beforehand. But they all count as dinosaurs to me. I mean, Dimetrodon, T-Rex, the meat eaters were my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what would you say the last, like very recently, what was the last time you pulled someone's leg?
Boy. When was the last time? I feel like I just did it fairly recently. don't know if this counts as like a full prank, but I spent a week in England. It was a lovely week. It was the first time ever off the continent for me, and did like a book tour of England, which was fantastic. So some of my friends at Titan Books, or one of my friends, Lydia, who was my publicist and took me around for the week, I just happened to notice at one point, because we were in all these train stations, and every train station, like there were not the conductors, but the people sort of in charge of keeping the trains moving were blowing whistles. And I was just like, man, you people in England love blowing whistles. So I still continue to send Lydia like whistle gifts or whistle jokes. She bought me a British whistle before I came home, which was sort of funny. So I mailed back to England an American whistle. They do sound different.
I imagine that they do.
Yeah.
In what way? I mean, is it a difference in the material that they're made out of?
Well, it's funny. Well, the British whistles that I listened to had a higher trill, and you could tell they had a wooden or maybe not a wooden P, not a bamboo. Yeah, some sort of wood P in the middle. I don't know. I teach at a private school, and they make me coach as well. So like the more modern whistles that we have just have like holes in the side, so there's no P. Because, the P can get wet, it can get stuck. So, like, the P-less whistles are actually louder, and there's not that, like, trill to it.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to write a book on whistles, the differences.
Now, what do you coach?
Boy, this is weird. I coach the 8th grade football team and the JV high school basketball team.
Oh, man.
Yeah, basketball I enjoy. I mean, I like football, too, but I'm getting out of it after this year. Some of it's like you were just forced to do it. Like when I was first hired, I was hired a week before school started, and this was in the mid-90s, and the athletic director pointed me and said JV soccer as my assignment. I was like, I've never played soccer in my life. He said, oh, it's JV soccer. So the first soccer game I ever saw, I coached. Then eventually I went over to football, so it can change. Sometimes it's more just like being a body, just making sure that there's another adult, and usually, the person who actually knows the sport is in charge of the team.
Okay.
But, I've been there so long now that, coaching is sort of coaching.
Now, Paul, you had mentioned that you just came back from England.
Right.
Please share some of that experience with us.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. So it was, mid to late July. It started off, I was a guest at the Lit Edge convention in Derby. So it's a one-day convention. I think it's only 6 or 7 years old, so it's relatively new. But it was a lot of fun. So it was one day. It wasn't all horror, some science fiction and fantasy, etc. So it was very much like, not England's not a super exotic place for most people, but the conventions are what what our conventions in the U.S. are like. There were panels and dealer's room and all that stuff. But after that convention, I went to 4 other cities and did readings. And, the best part besides, getting to see England for me was one of the best parts was getting to meet writers like Mark Morris and Stephen Laws. And I got to meet Priya Sharma, and I got to have dinner with Ramsey Campbell and, hang out with Adam Neville. So that was really exciting just to meet all these people that I've been reading. And then the unexpected best part was seeing the Vampire Rabbit of Amen Corner in Newcastle.
Now this deserves a little more explanation here.
Yeah, so the fun part was I just happened to tweet out some pictures of in Newcastle, which is in northern England. And somebody on Twitter was like, hey, you have to go see the Vampire Rabbit. I'm like, okay. Tell me where it is. And actually only ended up being like 2 blocks from my hotel.
Oh, wow.
So this is like, it's some sort of gargoyle, but it is a rabbit. It's a black rabbit, with big ears. It's actually got red like claws. And the fun part, yeah, no, it looks scary. And it's it's perched over this doorway that's across the street from a giant old church, and they don't know like why it's there. I mean, there are competing theories, but ultimately, no one knows like why this thing has been there for however long it's been there.
Wow, because the first thing I'm thinking of is the number of the counting shall be 3 and.
right.
The holy hand grenade and all of that with the big nasty teeth. Oh my goodness. So yeah, apparently that had been just part of the cathedral and the stonework there.
Yeah, well, but it was across from the cathedral. It was a building. I don't know if the building there was the big cathedral, and then there was a building in behind the cathedral and across from it. So there's some theories that think that this is sort of like a two-finger salute, for England to the cathedral or to the Church of England. But
Okay.
but that's just a theory. No one knows for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it is very odd. But yeah, so if you're ever in Newcastle, you should look it up.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, that's wonderful. So you were able to go and that was part of your publicity. I'm assuming as part of the publicity tour for the Cabin at the End of the World?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how I'm trying to posit this question in such a way as to not be too imposing.
Okay.
But how is this book with that publisher to fulfill a contract that you have with William Morrow? I mean, just what led to that?
I see. So, well,
yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking where I'll start. So I'll start by saying first, I first got hooked up with William Morrow with A Head Full of Ghosts, and it was a 2-book deal. And that became A Head Full of Ghosts and Disappearance at Devil's Rock. And then, so after that, I was off deal. So I have a great relationship with my editor, Jennifer Brell. She's wonderful. I mean, she's really, helped save and then, make my career, or at least the second part of it, or a rebirth, however you'd want to put it. So anyway, once those 2 books were done, I had to pitch her a new book to get back on deal. And I actually pitched her a novel that she didn't like first. Now, I had ended up writing like a 30-page summary, which is really obnoxious. Like most summaries tend to be like 10 pages or so. So I knew I had overwritten the summary, and it would have been like this really long, almost sort of unwieldy book. And I wasn't totally in love with it, but I sent it to her anyway because that's all I had. And she was like, nah, and I needed to hear that from her. So I was okay that she didn't want to do that book. So luckily not too short after that, I was able to come up with the idea of the Cabin at the End of the World. And when I told her about the book, she was really excited about it. So I spent the summer of 2016 writing 50 pages and then a summary, about 10 pages. She needed at least 50 pages in the summary to present to the publisher. So yeah, and they agreed, and it's a 3-book deal. So it's Cabin. Next summer is a short story collection called The Growing Things and Other Stories. Yeah. And then some other novel that'll be out the next summer that I just started like a couple of weeks ago.
Do we get any type of a summary of what it might be about?
Oh, the novel? No. I'll say its working title is Survivor Song. Maybe that's all I'd be willing to say. But I'd be happy to talk more about the collection, which I just turned in edits on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that'll be out next
Please
summer.
Do.
Sure. So it's my longest book. It's almost 400 pages, 19 stories, which is quite a lot. But, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that a big publisher was actually willing to do a short story collection. They don't do very many, particularly for horror writers. And hopefully the fun part for people who've read the novels is that, 4 of the stories have connections to A Head Full of Ghosts or Disappearance at Devil's Rock. The title story, Growing Things, is a reference to, for those that have read A Head Full of Ghosts, the 2 sisters in A Head Full of Ghosts, Mary and Marjorie, tell each other stories. And in the novel, Marjorie tells Mary a story about these uncontrolled, these vines that grow uncontrollably and take over the world. And it really becomes like a theme of, that takes place in the novel. So that was actually a story I had written way back in like 2010 and decided to cannibalize for my novel. So the first story of the collection is the actual short story of The Growing Things that I wrote. Yeah, and then a couple other stories, 2 of the 2 originals to the collection. One is a novella called Notes from the Dog Walkers, which is sort of a fun title. And the story is actually notes left by people who are walking a dog for a writer. A very loose stand-in for myself.
Wow.
And that was a very fun story to write. It ends up getting quite meta, but it does have connections to both A Head Full of Ghosts and Disappearance at Devil's Rock. And then the last story in the collection is a story that actually takes place after the action of A Head Full of Ghosts. And it features Mary. Mary is an adult. The book on her life has come out. The tell-all book on her life has come out. And she's actually at San Diego Comic-Con on a panel.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, she's confronted by a really, obsessed fan. And she decides to tell the fan a Marjorie Mary style story. So that's most of the story. The frame is just Mary and the fan. And the main part of the story, it's called The 13th Temple, is the story that she tells.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
so that was a lot of info.
Hey, it was quite a bit of info. Oh my goodness. But yes, I for one, I'm gonna admit that I actually spoiled the end of that for myself a little bit.
Yeah.
Just by looking at your website while I was in the middle of reading the book.
Oh no.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh no, I saw something I shouldn't have. Crud.
Yeah.
And then I just went on and finished it, and it was.
Well, thanks. I'm glad. Geez, I'll have to try to figure out what is on my website that's spoily and maybe hide that somehow.
Okay. I'm not going to say it because
yeah,
it
sure.
is spoily.
Yeah.
So yes, it was a handwritten note.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
right.
That's what it was. It was the image of a handwritten note, and then I kind of saw that, and I'm like, oh no, what did I do? I know too much.
Yeah.
Not fair. But yes. Oh my goodness. So let's see. Why do you feel the desire to put pen to paper?
That's a hard one to answer. It's funny. Earlier in June, I was invited to teach a workshop and give like a lecture at Seton Hill University in Pittsburgh, or just outside of Pittsburgh. And I was supposed to give like this big lunch talk, keynote speech, and it ended up being like almost like 40 minutes. And the theme of it was, why do I write horror and why do I write? And I felt like it took me, I don't know, those 40 minutes to talk about it. But even then, in some ways, it's still kind of like a fun, inexplicable thing to me. But I would say, like briefly, I do think, I know, so growing up, I had this sort of split where like my family life was amazing. Like I'm very close with my siblings and my parents. And my parents had me when they were 22, so in a lot of ways, it almost felt like, my dad was almost like an older brother at times. Someone who would like play games and sports, because he was so young. And my grandparents were in the same towns. Like every Sunday, we would go there. So I had this amazing family experience. But when I went to school, it was really not a good experience, particularly in the ages from like 7th grade to 10th grade, where I was I'm 6'4", 200 pounds now, but when I was in middle school and high school, I was very short and super, super skinny, and it was picked on and bullied a lot, to the point where I felt like that part of school experience for me was more just like a survival experience. So I, without getting too self-analyzing or putting myself on the couch too much, I do think I have come to the realization, I do think why I write a little bit or a lot. I don't know how much of it is, but I do think part of the reason why I do write is to continually prove to that middle schooler and early high schooler that's still inside of me that, I have something that's, worth saying or listening to. But otherwise, I don't know. I just think it's a combination of everything I've experienced. I don't know. Like I've always been drawn to horror movies, and even if they terrify me, there are a bunch that I don't like. There's a lot of things in horror that I don't like, and I think fans should feel empowered to criticize things that they don't like of their favorite things. But I don't know. So that part of it, I'm not sure. It just draws me to do it. I was joking with another writer fairly recently that, after every book, I sort of fantasize like, well, if I never write another thing again, I could, be proud of the books that I've done. And then I fantasize about just like sitting on the couch and watching Netflix for the rest of my life. But, I eventually find myself back to the keyboard, every time. So.
Okay. Yeah. Because I was going to say, if you're just consuming media all the time, it's like, well, where's the action in that?
Right.
It's better to actually be on the court and engaging and doing.
No, definitely. I've always engaged, I think, without realizing it. Like, I was a big Larry Bird fan as a kid. So I'd be in the backyard shooting, baskets for hours, just, pretending I was Larry Bird. I'm a big music fan. I used to come home every day after school and just lay on the floor with, our record player speakers, which are like, huge, tented over my head. Yeah, just, imagining that I was actually playing the music. So I play guitar a little bit. And I still listen to music like that, to be honest. Like some of my favorite songs, I don't know. I'm enjoying the song, but I'm also still imagining that I'm the one doing it. So yeah, there is that part that's always wanted to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And I can understand I definitely understand the desire to participate and be a part of, something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
Definitely. And the drive and desire to participate and be part of it fully. Let's see. And gonna roll again.
Okay.
Let's see. How? I would say some writers do have a daily schedule. Do you find yourself struggling? I mean, you're definitely not struggling at all. But let's see. I find myself struggling to maintain a daily schedule devoted specifically to producing something,
right?
A word count sorts.
I would say no. I definitely have struggles. I mean, this month actually, I've not done a great job of meeting sort of my sort of goals. Yeah, I've just started a new novel, so some of that is sometimes I've had to take a break and do some research. But typically, once I get going, I try to set myself a goal of 500 words a day. But with that in mind, I'll say 500 words a day, and then for the week, like, well, maybe a few days I might miss. So I said if I can get 2,500 to 3,000 words a week, that's good. And then I even break that into like a month. Like, I'm going to miss some. I'm going to fall short some weeks, fall short some days. If I can get like 10 to 12,000 words, I mean, 15,000 words would be amazing. But if I can get 10 to 12,000 words for a month, I'll feel okay. Like I won't be upset at myself. To me, I feel like it's important you do want to set goals, but you also want to set them realistically. So, I mean, it's hard enough. You're going to be beating yourself up enough as a writer during the process of writing. And you don't want to set goals that are so hard to achieve that you're going to end up beating yourself up over missing those goals too. So those are some of the numbers games that I play with myself. And honestly, like I don't have like a set schedule. I never have. I just try to take each day as a different one and try to, find an hour here or an hour there. Sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's at night, during the school year. Sometimes it's actually during like a free period or if the kids are taking a test.
Oh gosh, like it's study hour or something. It's like, okay, kids, you're having a study period today.
Right. Yeah. I've never done that.
Okay.
That. Yeah.
Good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, unfortunately, I've stuck with the 500 words a day thing, and I pretty much just end up, it just evolves into a stream of consciousness sooner or later as you try to dig for anything, anything. And then I figure at that point, it's probably best to step away for a second.
Yeah. No, sure. Absolutely. I mean, with Cabin, I would say more times than not, I missed my 500 word a day, but I also wasn't too worried about it because I knew it was going to be a shorter novel. And it became to feel like, oh, maybe this is more like of a a 300, 400 word type of thing. Because I was really, some of the things that were difficult for me as a writer was, there aren't a ton of action scenes, but the ones that did, involve like a lot of staging of, different characters having to do some very physical stuff. I found that took me a long time to get the way I wanted it to be. So some of it is, I try to remind myself, and I think it's good for writers to remind themselves that every story is different. It's not going to go the same way as the previous story, particularly when it's novels, because they're so long. Not even if it's necessarily the pages, the word count, but the amount of time it takes to write a novel. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So if you find out partway through the process that, this one's just going to be a little bit different, for whatever reason, I try to go with it and just embrace the idea that, hey, this is a totally new project. And I try to treat it that way. And that also helps to keep me, I don't want to say interested, but it keeps me excited. Like, oh, this is different. Everyone likes, as much as, I like routine. It's also, me, the fun parts are when something unexpected happens or something sort of new or different happens. And that could be just the story itself, but it also could be the approach to the story.
Oh, crud. Yeah.
Uh-oh, you lost the dice?
There we go. Okay.
The die, sorry.
Yes,
improper.
I'm sorry. Well, I mean, they could be dice.
Yeah.
I'm blaming Jim Pinto for this one because I'm taking development of his idea. What? You should just roll dice and use that to determine which question you ask.
Yeah.
But so, oh man. That's what I get for just being like, I'm going to go freeform today. So I'm absolutely freeform today. And when did you decide that teaching was for you?
It was, I don't know. Like, it seems sort of as default, which sounds weird because, when I went to college, in Providence College, I started off as a math education major. And I, at that point, I didn't really know I didn't honestly think about like what it was I wanted to do. I was just like, I'm good at math, so I'll just stick with it. What can you do with math? And I wasn't smart. I wasn't smart enough to go talk to like, counselors or anything. It's like, oh, I guess if you learn math, then you're going to be a math teacher. So, I mean, that's honestly like how it started.
Okay.
And then partway through, it's not a very exciting story, but I ended up not a math education major. I did a double major of math and humanities. And humanities is just a hodgepodge of liberal arts classes. But out of that stew of liberal arts classes, I only took one English class. It was actually my second semester. My last semester of senior year was my first and only English class. But it was a very important class for me. The teacher was great. And in that class, I read Joyce Carol Oates's "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" And that story really just like, I'll never forget reading it and thinking to myself, oh, I didn't know people wrote stuff like this. It really sort of opened my eyes and helped to make me become a reader. So when I went to grad school, I got to go for free, which was amazing. And they had me teach one class per semester. So, I was exposed to teaching by necessity because I had to teach a class. And, I enjoyed it. So, I just stuck with it.
Wow.
I like having the summer off.
I can imagine. Yeah. I mean, I would too. What else was I going to say? All right. So have you always been drawn to Boston? Or has it just kind of been like, well, here I am. I'll stay.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I'm sort of a hopeless parochial New Englander, but I grew up in Beverly, Massachusetts, which is 20 miles north of Boston. I went to both colleges I went to were in New England. One was in Rhode Island, one was in Vermont. So I've never lived in any other part of the country, besides New England. So, I mean, there is like just, change is hard and it's the place I know. But I must say that I've really enjoyed, and it's funny, like if you had asked me like 10, 15 years ago, I'm like, I have no interest in traveling. But, in the past 10 years, I've had the opportunity because of the book stuff to, to go to LA a bunch of times, and this summer to England, and I really do enjoy it. It's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing more travel, and hopefully I get that opportunity. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like writing though, I don't know. It's funny because I mean, Boston. There's so many cliches about Boston that I think some are true, but some aren't. And the same, I would guess with like New England and Gothic literature in general. I think there's it's been mined so much, but I still think there's new stuff to be done, using New England, I hope. It is sort of, in terms of America anyway, or in terms of the country, the United States itself, it is, one of the older areas in terms of history. You definitely feel it when you're walking around. And that was like a fun part of England. It's like, oh man, as a Bostonite, we sort of like, oh yeah, this is the history of America. And then like you go to England and things are thousands of years old as opposed to just a couple hundred. So I mean, those things are just fun to, even if you're not even going to use it necessarily in the story. I like it having it there, like hanging over the background. So I think it helps to give like a flavor or a feel to the stories.
All right. Now here comes the fun part.
Okay.
What was the first album you bought with your own money?
First album I bought with my own money. Okay, I think those were gifts, so I won't count that. I think I'm going to say Pyromania by Def Leppard.
Ah! Yes. Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
How long have you been playing the guitar?
Not long. I didn't pick it up until I was a senior year in college because I just had a very good friend who played, and he would play, and finally, like after just watching him play, I was like, hey, show me a few chords. Oh. So I mean, I was really learning how to play the guitar and then messing around with writing at like the same time. But Def Leppard was well before that. I was 7th grade. Yeah, there was as a 7th grader, I had a jean jacket and Def Leppard pins, and there was
little buttons all over it.
Oh yeah. There was a place called the Record Rack in Beverly that I would walk like 2 miles to whenever I got money every day to spend like to buy like 3 or 4 pins and look at the tapes and stuff.
Oh man.
What's your first record? Yeah.
Oh geez. It was Steve Vai, Passion and Warfare on cassette.
A cassette, yeah.
Yep. And continue.
Yeah, I was gonna say no. Yeah, Def Leppard was a record. Yeah, it's pre-cassettes by a few years. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I kind of got a sense of that when you said 96 because it's like, oh, I graduated in 96.
Oh, did you?
So anyway, so how long did you do the band thing before you realized, nah, better not?
Probably I would say for a few years, but again, I was never actually part of like a full band. I did record some stuff with a friend who was a really good drummer. Like he's like a legitimate drummer, a good musician, very good friend. And that was fun, messing around with an old 4-track recorder. I think I have a couple of songs somewhere that we recorded that are kind of fun. They'll never see the light of day.
4-track.
Yeah. But it was right around those same like mid 90s, late 90s, where I was still trying to figure out, which I could do, which I couldn't do. Yeah. I mean, then the realities of, married and having a young child, that's kind of tough to start a band and then go play. Yeah. But again, I never felt like I was good enough to play. Although weirdly, this might sound very bizarre, but I always felt like the biggest obstacle, because I could play okay at my peak of guitar playing, and I still play. Yeah. But I always felt like the gear, like knowing enough about the gear that you needed was like the biggest obstacle. It's like I don't want to. It seemed like a ton of work to figure out, because you actually do just need more than a guitar and an amp in a core, like in a thing. You need, the pedals and like all these other things, and I'm like, yeah. Yeah. Well, that was my excuse. That was my excuse anyway.
Okay. I'm just gonna shout out Propeller Head's Reason, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's a wonderful dog. I use that all the time. So I recommend looking into that. That's something that you still are interested in achieving. It's a great deal of fun.
Yeah.
Let's see, the one claim to recording anything that I can even talk about is one time I did a track with Mia Fisher of Lords of Acid a couple of years ago, and that was so much fun.
Oh, it must have been,
Yeah. So, and let's go back to okay. So when did you wait, I think we already went over that, about when you made your first professional sale.
Yeah.
That was in like 97?
I think it was like 2000 or 2000.
Okay.
Actually, it's funny. I got like the first acceptance letter for the first, professional sale while I was in the hospital, like 2 days after my first son was born. So it was September of 2000. Yeah, I'm just actually remembering that happened. I'd made some like smaller, like $10, $20 sales, but yeah, I was in that. I think I was in the hospital, like, because he was a C-section, so they stayed in the hospital for like 3 days. Yeah, man, that was so long ago. Because he's a senior in high school. He's about to start his senior year in high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and actually, he does a lot of recording. He doesn't play any instruments, but he's into hip hop and trap, and so he makes a ton of, he produces a bunch of beats and produces songs for his friends, and he's really quite good. And he just uses his laptop and I think it's the Logic software. Yeah. So no,
that's a little bit better of a grade than what I have been using.
Yeah. No, I know he's hard at work on like a big project of his that he's going to release soon. So I'll be sure to post links to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Oh gosh. So when again can we expect the collection of short stories from you?
I don't have the exact date, but it'll be summer next year sometime.
Oh, okay.
I'm hoping it'll be June, just because June has been the releases for the last 3 books.
Oh, okay.
It makes life easier for me because if it comes out in June, then I can go out and do some promotional stuff in July and August, while I'm not teaching.
Yeah, because that was the next question. Can we expect to see you at Necronomicon 2019?
Yes, I will definitely be there.
Awesome. Yes. So I'm definitely making an appearance at that one.
Great. No, I can't wait. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Oh, yes. And now, if I remember right, you did something with Stephen Graham Jones?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. We should start talking about that more again.
Yes.
We co-wrote a young adult novel together. It's called The Floating Boy and the Girl Who Couldn't Fly. I'm glad I remember the title because we went through so many title iterations. Like sometimes I'm like, was this the title or did we change it to something else? Mm-hmm. It was a lot of fun writing with Stephen. I mean, he's so talented. To me, that was the favorite part of it. The publishing side of it was, I mean, Cheesy did great. But like, we had submitted it through my agent first to some bigger places, and that was kind of annoying, the type of feedback that we were getting. But the actual writing of it with Stephen was a dream. It was a lot of fun. The only hard part for the writing is that Stephen writes so fast. My plan was like, oh, okay, we can work on this book together, no pressure.
Like, and then it's like, keep up.
Yeah, right. When you're working on your chapter, I can do my thing, and then while I'm working on a chapter, you can do your thing. So I'd spend like a week or 2 on a chapter, and I would send it, and then Stephen would send me his bit like the next day, or the longest was like 2 days later. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Yeah, he just writes so fast and amazingly well. I mean, he's a great person and a great writer.
That's fantastic. So do you anticipate co-writing anything with Stephen in the future, or is that up in the air? We'll see.
We haven't talked about it, but I mean, I would. It's hard. Everyone's so busy, with their own schedules. That just happened to be like a time where I know I was sort of like in between stuff, and working on that book with him really sort of helped me get through some issues that I was having, because that book happened. Let me back up a little bit. My first two novels that were published were these crime novels, The Little Sleep and No Sleep to Wonderland. They came out in 2009, 2010. And that was with Henry Holt. And, the first book did okay. The second book was dead on arrival. And, so it was not a very positive experience with Henry Holt. And, after those two books, I was just really upset and bitter about how it didn't work out. And it really let it affect me, for almost 2 years. And I think, one of the ways that I helped climb out of that was, getting to work with Stephen, because it was fun to write with him. It made writing fun again. And that helped me sort of overcome those, or let go those feelings of bitterness, and, and jealousy had started, taking root in my head too. And, bitterness and jealousy are the page killers. Like, it doesn't do good for anybody. So,
no, yeah. I mean, and without sidestepping at all, I mean, that pretty much stepped into the next question that I pretty much think that addressed, but which was going to be, what was your, what would you say is the most gracious response to rejection that you've had in your career?
So for me, like, my most gracious response, boy, I don't know if I've ever had a gracious response. No, I would guess working with Jennifer. I mean, because the nice thing was, after going through sort of what I went through, and really maturing and being able to handle rejection more emotionally. Like, when I first started, I remember just making terrible mistakes, but I gave myself a 24-hour rule. Like, you can't respond. You can't respond to any criticism for 24 hours. Because usually, your knee-jerk response is like, what are they talking about? But usually after 24 hours, you can be more objective and go, oh, I see what they're saying, or, oh, nah, I still think my way's better, and here's why. I still sort of abide by that rule, or at least, like, I'll walk away for a few hours before responding. But now with Jennifer, like, I mentioned she rejected a novel idea that I'd sent her. And even like after Head Full of Ghosts, I didn't have another novel. So I sent her like 4 or 5 different novel proposals before we landed on Disappearance at Devil's Rock. So, so I went through many rejections with her quite a bit. But I don't know, and it was fine. So, I mean, rejection's still hard. Honestly, for me now, the hardest thing is, trying to avoid, online, comments about your stuff, and reviews. I mean, that's sort of a different form of rejection at that point. But, it's always there. It's part of the deal. It's human nature to want to look at some of it. You just can't let it take over your life.
It's true. That's true. I think who was it? Oscar Wilde said it best. It's better to be talked about, or it is better, in some sense, it's better to be disliked, at least, than
absolutely.
ignored.
Yeah. I think the hard part is you can rationally understand that that's true. So for example, the Cabin at the End of the World, I think this engendered some really strong reactions from people. People really seem to like it, and there's a bunch of people who really, don't like it, and don't like the ending in particular. And rationally it can be like, oh, I would rather people having strong reactions. You don't want people to read the book and just be like, no, you want them to be like, oh, this is great, or oh, I'm so pissed off. I mean, that's what you want. I mean, that's I think a sign of a healthy book. But you can understand that rationally, but still at the same time, it's hard to overcome the lizard brain of like, seeing negative things. Particularly when we talked earlier, when I sort of realized that part of the reason I write is to try to prove to people that I have something of worth to say. So it's kind of hard to not like let that old middle school, high schooler who was picked on like read those negative things and not have that voice sort of crop back up.
Negative feedback.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. But I will say I'm very proud of myself that I've only read one Amazon review. It was like the first day the book was on Amazon, and I've read no Goodreads reviews, which is so different than what I did with The Head Full of Ghosts, where I read everything. And drove myself a little crazy. I'm like, you got to stop doing this. So,
Because I would only imagine that if you let yourself be ruled by that, your every waking moment would be spent like hopping from social media outlet to social media outlet, scanning for, wow. And that's a job in and of itself.
Yeah, not a good one.
No. No way. Now your proposals, like coming up with book ideas and proposing them to an agent, an editor.
Yeah.
What is your process for that? I mean, I know that there are a ton of outlets that I could just Google and find some format somewhere. But to you, how would you go about doing this formless, nameless thing?
Yeah, well, so these really, the ones I've been doing for Jennifer, really, I wouldn't call them necessarily. They're not like official proposals because I already have an editor, so it's not like I have to sell her on me. I just have to sell her on a certain idea. So I've treated these proposals as essentially like 10 or 12 page versions of the novel, where it's just, this is the plot. Maybe I give a little bit of setup to like a certain character if there's important background, like just mention it. But it's really almost like I'm trying to give a map to the plot points of the book.
So kind of like a longer elevator pitch.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So I'm terrible at doing like the paragraph summary. Especially if I haven't written the book yet, I have no chance of doing that. So, some book like A Head Full of Ghosts, I didn't write one because I wasn't on deal at the time. But for most of my novels, I have written sort of a summary. Not all of them, but some I have. And honestly, I don't want to say it's more fun to do it without a summary, but it does feel a little bit more fun sometimes to do it without a summary because, everything is sort of new. I mean, I probably still have most of the story in my head, which was the case for A Head Full of Ghosts. But when things have a lot more, like a mystery setup, like the mystery novels, and even Disappearance of Devil's Rock, I felt like had more of a mystery sort of structure. I feel like I have to have a summary of sorts for those because I'm not good enough to make up a mystery plot as I go. I kind of need, it's not to say things can't change, but it's nice to have at least, the scaffolding to work from. You can change your mind and decide to build a new part of the house afterwards or as you're going, but at least to have the basic parts there.
Rough.
Yeah.
Rough pieces of structure.
Right.
Now, sci-fi or fantasy?
As a movie viewer, sci-fi.
As a book reader?
As a reader, it's probably a tie. Honestly, like I read way much more horror, obviously. But yeah, it's really sort of a tie. So I've read most of the classics in both genres, or not all the classics, but what I've read would be considered classics, I suppose. I wish I read more, but there's only so much time in the day. Like I spend most of my time reading horror or straight literary fiction these days. Okay. That's kind of what I kind of try to mix in my own writing. So, yeah.
I can kind of understand that. I think I was listening to an interview with Nick Mamatas, and he said something about, I just read something once and then I'm on with it. If I lose interest, I just keep going, because if you read every new thing that comes out, there's so much content already out there. Right. So I can understand from that point.
Yeah.
Now, let's see. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, boy. That's hard. As a kid, I was always a Spider-Man fan. I wasn't a huge comic reader, but Spider-Man was like the only comics I'd read. But I don't know if I want to be bit by a spider. Spiders are scary. Okay. I mean, Superman's flying power is pretty rad. I think it'd be kind of hard to not choose that one. Although, like, having like great strength would be awesome too. It's hard. I'd be greedy. I would want all the powers. But if I have to pick one, I'll help flying.
Flying? Okay.
Flying.
All right.
Well, that sort of presupposes you would have to have some other sort of strengths because, if you're flying, you're putting a great deal of stress on your body, so you probably would have to have some strength to go along with it. So I feel like maybe I'm getting a few extras with the flying, just on the basis of being able to fly.
From the laws of aerodynamics.
Yeah, from the laws of human flight, yes.
Yeah, that don't exist.
Right.
What was I going to say? Star Wars or Star Trek? Or if you don't like either one of those, Dune. Which one of the three?
Geez, I was going to choose the fourth one, the Lord of the Rings movies.
Okay.
Well, because I'll start arguments at school with kids. Like I like the Lord of the Rings movies better than the Star Wars movies. Although I should be able to answer your first question. I would take Star Trek over Star Wars. My dad was a huge Trek fan, so by proxy I watched it. I did enjoy, the Captain Picard years, and I love Wrath of Khan. It's still like one of my favorite, fun '80s movies.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. So, there's another one that I'm missing. And you said you weren't that big of a comics fan, so I'm going to skip the Marvel DC.
Okay, yeah. Although I'm probably more Marvel, just from the few things, superhero eyes, from the few things that I've read, probably more Marvel. Although, like as an adult, I've read more comics. I do love Alan Moore's take on Swamp Thing. I think that's great.
I love Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
Tabletop or video games? Which do you prefer?
I've definitely played more video games, but with my family, we play a ton of games, tabletop and cards, especially. I think that's more fun. So I guess I'll go tabletop, even though I might have played more video games in my life. Because video games is just you. Like tabletop, you're playing with other people, and that's more fun.
That's true.
I mean, although I suppose people like kids now play with the headsets, so I've never really done the big group playing of video games. I guess that would be fun, but I'm sticking with tabletop. I know I keep trying to switch the answer, but I'll say tabletop.
I don't think there's any way that you can meta this one. But speaking of meta, what question do you wish I would have asked you? I'm noticing that our hour is starting to draw to a close.
Jeez. Maybe what impact on your life has the band Husker Du / singer Bob Mould had on your creative life?
Yes, tell me about that.
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, sorry. My screen said low power mode. I said no because I was hitting a button. No, we're good.
Oh, okay. Tell me about it.
It's been huge. So I discovered Husker Du, Bob Mould in college, and took over my life. I'm a huge fan, and I mentioned I wanted to play guitar so I could learn how to play Bob Mould, Husker Du tunes, and I still play them. And I named my first short story collection after a Bob Mould song, Compositions for the Young and Old. That was 2004 with Prime Books. So no, I mean, I've probably seen Bob 20, 30, I'd say 30 times.
Wow.
Like I said, I'm still like a huge music fan, not a frustrated musician, but always dreamed of being one. So I feel like I can trace my want to create back to my sort of love and discovery of Husker Du, because they so took over my life for a very formative period of my life when I was 18 to like 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's probably the answer to another one of the questions that I had, which is, what song would you like to have played at your funeral?
I just thought of Faith No More, Surprise You're Dead would be really funny.
Yes.
But what song would I want to have played at my funeral? Man, I feel like I would have to give that like great thought, because there's some, that's an important song that's pick.
Yes.
Although I'm not really around, so I guess I don't know. I don't know.
Which album can you listen to all the way through without skipping a single track?
Oh boy, without skipping. I don't know if there's any album I can do that now anymore. Well, you said can. You said can.
Yeah.
I would say Helmet's Meantime.
Huh?
A band called Helmet and their record.
Oh, yes.
Meantime. Yes.
Yes. I remember that one. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a great album.
It is a great album. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but there's another one that's laying in there somewhere. What album? What music do you like to listen to when do you have a soundtrack or an album that you listen to and you put on when you sit down to write?
Yeah. So I used to prefer to write to nothing, but if stuff's going on in the house or if I'm like in a public place, I need music to drown stuff out. So I can only listen to things that don't have a lot of lyrics. So I tend to listen to instrumental stuff when I'm writing. This might sound weird, but I wrote 3 books essentially. It wasn't constant, but I'd always use this record or soundtrack. It was the soundtrack to the movie Ravenous, which came out in the late 90s.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's such an eclectic soundtrack. It's not on Spotify. I'm actually kind of bumming out because my phone crashed all its music recently. And I haven't been able to get that back on my phone. I mean, I have the CD, so I just have to get the CD back onto my laptop somehow. But no, I wrote, for A Head Full of Ghosts, Devil's Rock, and A Chunk of Cabin. The nice thing about that soundtrack, it was exactly an hour. So I knew if I only had an hour, I could put that on.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've trained myself to be able to write to that particular soundtrack. Like I just fall right into it. Yeah. So that's probably my favorite, but I always, I do use Mogwai as well. And then there's a older creepy Lustmord. I think that's sort of redundant, but there's a Lustmord record, that I write to as well.
Okay. Now, speaking of Ravenous, there is a band that I absolutely adore. I don't know if they're still around anymore. They're called Daughters, and they wrote a lovely song to that movie.
They did. I didn't realize that.
Oh, yes.
No, I have their last record, I think. No, I think it's their last record. I definitely have a Daughters record. The
self-titled by Hydra Head? Or put out under Hydra Head? The self-titled, should be Daughters. And it has
a picture of like a woman.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's on my phone. I own that one. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I like that album quite a bit. Is that song on that record? What's the name of the song? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, the First Supper, I think.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm gonna have to go back and like really listen hard to those lyrics now.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so glad you told me this.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I love those guys. Like when I was learning ASL, and I still kind of have it because if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
And it was the one about the man coming to the Know Nothing town. The eyes are the eyes are the something of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And that one I signed to a lot.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, but anyway. Yeah, so do you have any more questions that you wish that I would have asked you? Because I feel like I'm dropping a gigantic opportunity here, but I don't want to keep you too long from your evening.
Yeah, there's no more wishes. There was the will of the dice, or the die, sorry.
All right. So, and that is thanks to Jim Pinto. So anyway, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And you have a wonderful evening, Paul.
Thank you. You too.